2,500 years ago, Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, established the fact that one cannot acquire knowledge by looking towards those purely based on their authority. He was convinced that we should be asking ourselves deep questions that stimulate our thinking before we accept any piece of information. This subject and way of thinking went on to intrigue one of his most famous students called Plato, and then even Aristotle. These philosophers believed that it is intellectual talent that distinguishes one human from the other. They laid the foundation of critical thinking based on a very important premise. Things are often very different from what they appear to be, and only a trained mind can look deep within to discover greater truths. Work on critical thinking continued to fascinate philosophers for many centuries. In the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, an Italian philosopher, realized something very profound. He believed that everything that was taught or written would be more sound and systematic if people looked at it with a critical bent of mind. This made him and some other thinkers begin the practice of including criticisms and counterviews that they received for their ideologies as part of its development. Aquinas and the others brought awareness to not only the potential power of reasoning, but also that of cross-examining. Later in the 17th century, Rene Descartes, a mathematician and a philosopher, wrote a text in critical thinking called Rules for the Direction of the Mind. In it, Descartes argued that in order to think deeply, there needs to be systematic disciplining of our mind. Every part of thinking, he said, should be questioned, doubted, and tested. Cut to the 20th century, and we will witness many leaps in the development of the concept of critical thinking, as thinkers across the world began to acknowledge its crucial need in education and in everyday life. In 1910, philosopher and educationist called John Dewey was the one who coined the term critical thinking. He emphasized that social reform is best initiated inside the school. His remarkable contribution in the field laid the foundation for what we know today as inquiry-based learning, and his work continues to influence educationists across the world. This is the history of critical thinking, and we have only scratched the surface.